Airsoft friends, and welcome to this video today, where today I'm going to be teaching you how to swap your connectors over on your Rift from Mini Tamiya to Deans. Now, as I'm sure many of you are aware out there, our electric guns need electricity in order to work, so we put batteries inside them, and usually we put them in the stocks so then they're safely stored and cannot come to any harm. But in order for our batteries to connect to our Rifts and use their electric current to then make them go shooty bang bang at other people, we need to connect them. And there's a few different types of connection options available out there in the world, which are, you know, kind of commonplace within Airsoft. Probably the most common one out there is the Mini Tamiya connector, which looks like this. And I think the only reason why this is so common in the Airsoft scene is because manufacturers often use these as the default connectors on pretty much all of the Rifts that they do. I've only ever had really a handful of Rifts that haven't come with the Mini Tamiya connection. My Crytac did, my ASL did, my Ares did, this one did, my KWA TK45. So it's safe to say that in this day and age, the Mini Tamiya connection is still very common out there in the world. But what other options are there, and why would you want to use those? Well, the other main common one out there, I would say, is the Deans connector. There are different other connectors out there, but I'm not really going to spend too much time looking at those, just because Deans is the one which I'm personally a fan of. I swap all of my Rifts over to use Dean connectors, and I'm going to recommend that you do that as well. Haha, do. So yeah, why would you want to use Dean connectors over Tamiya connectors? Well, Dean connectors, are also known as T connectors, look like this. And the shape of the connectors are, as you can see, quite long, solid metal rectangles with like springy bits on them as well. And this is really good because that means there's a large surface area and they're nice and tight when connected, which lowers the resistance of the electricity, which ultimately means you get a better transition of power from your battery to your Rift, so it will improve your Rift's performance. I think in future I may do a video where I test, you know, Tamiya connectors and Dean connectors and see if I can find an actual difference in performance between the two of them. That would actually be really interesting. So yeah, note to self, do a video where I test Tamiya connectors and Dean connectors. But today anyway, what we're going to be looking at is converting and how to convert your Mini Tamiya Rift to using Dean connectors. And you know what, it is pretty easy to do. There are a few tools that you need though, so like cutting plier type things and a soldering iron, but as long as you've got those, that's kind of pretty much everything. And you can get those tools pretty cheap. I'm fairly certain you can get soldering irons on Amazon for like £15, £20, something like that. I do have a bit more of a fancy one. It's like quite a big Maplins one. Rest in peace Maplin, by the way. It's quite a big one. There's a lot of different temperature settings on there. You can change it from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and yeah, this is quite a fancy soldering iron, but you don't have to get anything anywhere near as fancy as that. The only reason why I have one like that is because I actually managed to get it for free. And also I do a lot of soldering, so even if I didn't have this soldering iron, I probably would want to get something along those lines anyway, just because when I do solder, I want it to, you know, go well and efficiently and quickly. So yeah, regarding tools, all you really need is a set of like cutlery things here like this, and a soldering iron, and you're all good to go. I'm also going to be showing you how to swap the connector on your batteries. They're pretty much the same, but there's a couple of very important caveats which you need to be aware of when you're working with the batteries as opposed to when you're working with the Rift. A very important note as well when you're soldering connectors onto things is that you want the long prongy pokey connector on the item which doesn't have the electric current flowing through it. Now what I mean by that is if you have a battery and you were to solder the long prongy kind of Deans connector onto it, that means it could short out when it touches anything. For example, if I put it on the desk and it touched this can of Red Bull, it would short out, very bad for the battery and a hazard as well. With this battery here, which has already got a Deans connector on it, because the connectors are inside of the plug, it's going to be very hard for me to get something in there to touch both of them and then to short that battery out. So always make sure you put the right type of plug on the right type of appliance. And yeah, I did just call my Airsoft gun an appliance. So first of all, with the Rift, you want to come to it and you want to cut the connector off. It doesn't actually matter if you remember which color goes in which hole on that, because you're going to be swapping the connector over, so we're going to be looking at those different connection types later on. The vast majority of wires out there are going to be identifiable to which is positive and which is negative. So for example, with this battery pack here, this is the positive wire because it's red, and this is the negative wire because it's black. You may find that both of your wires are black, but one of them has got like a white stripe on it or like a white broken line on it, and that means the one with the white line on it is the positive wire. If for some reason the wires that you're working with are just both completely black, then please do go online, Google the type of connector, so Tamiya XT60, whatever it is that you're cutting off, and see which one is positive and which one is negative. Then you can make a note of that and you know which one of your wires is positive and negative, and then you can make sure that, you know, you'll fit them the right way round later on. If you solder them on the wrong way round, then later on you could end up damaging your Rift or damaging your battery as well, and that's something which you really don't want to happen. I highly recommend though putting on the connectors in the exact same way that I'm telling you how to do it in this video, just because this is the way that the connectors are fit onto Airsoft riffs. So if you fit it the other way around, like put the negative onto the positive terminal and the positive onto the negative, and you borrow somebody else's battery when you're out in the field, you could end up damaging their battery and blowing up your MOSFET. So yeah, make sure that you do what I say in the video. Once you've got your connector cut off, you want to remove some of the plastic coating on the wire so you've got some wire in order to get it ready for soldering. Some people at this point like to twist the wire, however, I don't really like to do that because I want to tin the wire in a kind of spread out pattern so I get a really nice surface area connection onto the Dean's connector. What I mean by tinning is that's when you just kind of like put a load of solder onto the wire that you're then going to connect to the thing or the other wire as well, because it just makes it much easier to solder them together when you've got a load of solder already in there. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm literally just putting solder into the wire so it's ready to go. So I'm going to do this with both the positive and the negative terminals on the riff, and then once those are done, I'm going to get some of my heat shrink and I'm going to slide it down the wires because I want to make sure that I don't forget to do this later on. So many times I've like soldered wires together forgetting to put the heat shrink on, so I've had to take it off and then put them back on again. And essentially what the heat shrink is, it's a non-conductive material, and once you've soldered your wires onto the connector, you move the heat shrink up, apply a bit of heat either using like a lighter, a torch, or in my case I like to use my soldering iron, and that shrinks that material down, grabs it nice and tight, and that means if a bit of metal was to touch across those connectors, it's not going to short out, it's not going to cause any issues, it's going to be nice and safe. And also it's a nice way to finish off your soldering job too. Now just like we tinned the wires, we're also going to tin the connectors as well. We're going to heat them up with a soldering iron, put some solder on there so there's a nice little bead ready for us to then connect our wire to it. One of the biggest tips I can give you about soldering is that solder melts solder very, very quickly. And what I mean by that is if you've got a hot soldering iron and you put it onto like a solder connection, that heat is going to dissipate a lot throughout that part, and it's going to take quite a while for it to heat up and then the solder to come off. Whereas if you put a bead of solder onto your soldering iron and put that onto a connection, it will pretty much melt it instantly. This will save you a ton of time when you're doing your soldering and will also give you a better end result as well. So now we've got our wires tinned and our connector tinned, it's time to solder our wires onto there. And the way I like to do this is to put a bit of solder on my soldering iron, use that to melt the solder on the connector, and then I bring the wire in, and when that touches the solder on the wire melts, and then it just kind of like all connects together in a nice solid interface. The way I like to test this is once I've got a wire stuck onto it, I'll grab the connector and I'll yank it a lot, and if it doesn't come off and it doesn't move, then I know I've got a really solid connection on there. Very important note as well, and this is what I spoke about before, to make sure that you get the wires on the right kind of connector on that. With the Dean's connector, also known as a T connector, it's called that because it's kind of in a T shape. You've got this connector at the top here and you've got this one here. Now the top of the T is the positive connection and the bottom of the T is the negative connection. Now I don't really have like a pseudonym or anything for how to remember that. I just kind of remember it because I've done so many different connections in my lifetime that it's just something that's built into me. But yeah, the top of the T is the positive and the bottom of the T is the negative. That's how you want to make sure you solder everything with your Dean's connectors. With your riff and your batteries, if you were to do it the other way around and you did the positive on like the bottom bit and the negative on the top bit, and you did that for the battery connection as well, your riff will work perfectly fine. But if you then gave your battery to somebody else to borrow, or you use somebody else's battery in your riff, you're gonna run into issues. So make sure you solder it the universal way that it's done. Tamiya connectors, exact same story. There's like a circle and there's like a square. One of those is always negative, one of those is always positive. So now we've got both of our wires soldered onto the connector, we can now put the heat shrink on there. You can also like shrink the heat shrink once you've got one attached on there, and that way you've got less of a chance of accidentally putting your soldering iron onto your existing soldered connection and then removing that hard work that you've done. This is kind of a personal preference. I don't have a recommendation like one way or the other. I kind of like to, you know, depending on my mood, I'll solder both connectors and then heat shrink at the same time, and sometimes I'll just like heat shrink it as I go. So yeah, there's no real right or wrong way to do that. And to shrink the heat shrink, there's loads of different ways, but essentially you just need to apply heat to the heat shrink once it's in the right place. So get your heat shrink, slide it up the wire, make sure it covers all of the connection, and then apply your heat. And again, this could be with a lighter, hot air gun, or you can just run the soldering iron up and down it, which is the way that I generally like to do it, because I've usually got the soldering iron in my hand or close by when I'm at this point of, you know, soldering connectors on. And just like that, we have swapped the connector of our rifle. Now the riff is done, we can now focus on the battery. And the battery is literally exactly the same as the riff. However, there are two main caveats. caveats. One of them, like I mentioned before, you need to make sure you put the right plug on the battery, because if you put the prongy things on the battery, then you're going to short it out, and that's going to be dangerous. And the other thing to be aware of is this is a battery. There is current in it. It is live. You do not want to short it out. And I learned this the hard way once when I did something really stupid. I had a battery just like this, which I was going to be swapping the connectors off of. So I came in and wanting to save time, because I'd just done a riff as well. And with a riff, you can cut both these wires at the same time like that. That's what I did with the battery. And because I wasn't thinking, when I cut through there, the tool made a short between the wires, and then it started sparking, and then the battery smoked, and then I had to throw the battery away because I just like killed it. So just do your battery one wire at a time. Cut one wire, solder it onto the battery, and heat shrink it as well. And if you manage to do all of those things like properly, like I said, you'll have a successful battery connection on there just like so, and your riff will have a Dean's connector on there, nice and lovely, just like so as well. And if you've done that properly, you'll be benefiting from better efficiency of power transfer from your battery to your riff, which will increase your trigger response and should hopefully increase your rounds per second as well. How much by the jury's out on, I will look at that as a future video and do a Dean's versus Tamiya like life test and see how much of a difference you really do get in that. But for me in Airsoft, I've always used Dean connectors, and before Airsoft, when I used to race 10th scale touring cars, I used Dean connectors on all of my battery packs just because, yeah, like they are the go-to in pretty much every kind of battery made sport that there is. So yeah, Dean connectors all the way, and they're super cheap, so you can get like a big bag of like 20 sets of them on Amazon and eBay and stuff like that. So it's well worth picking up a bag of them, because you're going to need the load of them in future when you blow up your batteries by accident. You think you're not going to do it, but I thought that, and I've done it quite a lot. Actually, this battery pack is dead because I blew it up when I was putting one of my riffs together, and I cut through both of the battery wires when I was putting the stock on. And actually the same thing happened to this battery pack too, and I just haven't got around to disposing of them properly yet. So yeah, that's on my to-do list. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful and insightful for you. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. As always, this video was sponsored by Project Airsoft. Tons of things on the website, and also a load of new items as well, focused on improving and upgrading your M4. So yeah, go check those out. We've got gate tighter MOSFETs, max hop units and triggers, pretty much everything you need to make your M4 super swanky. Huge shout out to all my patrons for supporting the channel month on month. Without your support, I wouldn't be able to do everything that I'm doing right now, so thank you all very much. And more giveaways are coming too. At the end of this month, we're doing a KJ Works Glock 23, a nice little mini Glock, and I must say, I've fallen in love with it a little bit. So if you want to be in with a chance of getting that, click the link in the description, go to the Patreon, and join the Airsoft Legend or Airsoft Royalty tiers. And if you'd like to make some Airsoft friends, check out the StayFreshShoe Airsoft Community Discord. We have over 600 Airsoft friends in there right now, and yeah, they're waiting for you to come in, join them, and be an Airsoft friend too. So I will see you over in the server. And until next time, thank you very much for watching. Remember to call your hits, and I'll see you in the next one.